What is the quickest way to get what we need? Let's go through some of the options before we bring out the RFP writing. Hello, YouTube, and welcome. I'm Catherine, and I'm your procurement guide. This week, I thought I would deal with something that's most commonly happening in public procurement is an end user comes rushing into I have a problem. I need it now. But, being public sector, we need to allow for the open, fair, and transparent competitive process. So, depending on the dollar value and the length of requirement. So, let's go through some of the options before we bring out the RFP writing. First step, is there an existing corporate supply arrangement, corporate standing offer? The federal government and the provincial governments all tend to have these agreements in place for most commonly purchased services and goods. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. So things that the whole province across Canada require will be on an existing standing arrangement or standing offer. The names tend to differ depending on the province and federal government, but they're all pretty much the same thing, that it's an existing agreement for goods and services that any other of the public sector entities may participate in. And generally, it's a draw against it or a purchase order against a standing offer, or maybe it's a limited competition to those on the list. So those are options that generally can be quick rather than reinventing the wheel and creating something brand new. You just have to verify the scope of what you need fits within the scope of what's on that corporate arrangement. If there is not a corporate arrangement, then your next step would be, is there an existing contract that our organization already has in place? You would be surprised at the number of times that someone else has gone through the exact same thing, but there isn't a central communication to know that someone else has bought the exact same thing, and potentially the scope of their solicitation will work for your needs. And this is where a centralized or hybrid procurement department comes in, because they see all the requests from multiple departments or multiple projects, and they'll try and make an allowance for doing a procurement that may be used elsewhere. So that might be an option. People have to go back to the contract, back to the original solicitation, just verify. But even just regular services that could be bundled together, procurement department will tend to look for spend analysis along with their accounts payable group and get some reporting on what are multiple departments purchasing. And I've seen this in colleges and universities a lot, especially with software licenses, couriers, um, even plant services for having living plants in your offices. I've seen after a spend analysis the number of departments all with their own individual contract. And in one case, it was individual contracts for courier services. And as a whole entity, it should have been one account, one statement, as opposed to the multiple statements that came into accounts payable at once. So I digress, but really individual departments buying their own things created more administration for the accounts payable department that was unnecessary. So consolidating reduced the price and reduced the paperwork on the accounts payable. So again, if you need something quickly, rather than trying to setting it up yourself because you think it's low dollar, you might want to check with the centralized procurement department just to see if there's already an existing contract that you could leverage rather than, again, reinventing the wheel. Hey, if we've exhausted the first and second options, the corporate supply arrangements and leveraging an existing contract, being public sector, is there another public sector entity that can provide the goods or services that we need? If we can't do it in-house, there might be another entity that can provide it to us. And public sector to public sector, generally tends to be exempt from the trade agreement rules, and all the money is coming from the same pool, potentially, like within the province, all the ministries, it's the same pool of money just allocated across. I've also ran across situations where the private sector doesn't want to compete with the public sector because, public sector is not working for profit. So generally, if you can find a public sector entity that can provide the goods or services, it's an option before going to full-blown RFP. And from the previous example with a college that had all these courier services set up, we actually could go to the centralized mail and courier service within the government who had existing contracts and worked with them. So it was actually a supply arrangement with a central ministry, and also us contracting with that central ministry and provided the services. I've also in another situation for a college where we could buy some goods from another ministry who already had an existing contract, and it allowed for a broader base of people using it. Not every situation will allow you to buy something from another ministry or another department if they're buying it. But again, I'm just giving high level tips here for you to explore your options. You need to go into the documentation and double check for compliance. So after we've exhausted those options, if we're going to RFP, then we want to make sure we build it well. And a very wise lawyer once told me, spend the time up front to do it right, or you're going to spend the time later in disputes, rework, contract management issues. So it's one of those things of if you rush the RFP, you potentially are dealing with a lot of headaches later. So pick your poison. If we do the planning well upfront, then you will get to contract much easier, and your contract management should be easier. So although you may want it rush, 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 you're going to pay for it later if you rush, rush, rush. A way to get it quickly is as soon as the idea hits your head, involve your procurement department, because the number of times people come 2 to 3 months after doing their own investigation and expect something really, really quickly, well, you have to bring us up to speed. You've run ahead by 3 months, catch us up. So another way to do things quickly is as soon as you think you're going to need something, give a heads up, and they may be able to give you all these options that I just offered you that you could have gotten it perhaps a couple of months ago. Who knows? Next week, I am going to get into the 7 questions I ask end users before drafting an RFP. So stay tuned for that. Hit subscribe, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks.